Good morning, everyone. Welcome to what I believe is the final meeting of the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means, Senate Committee on Finance, Joint Subcommittees on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. Yes, we've come to the end of the road. Would the committee secretary please call the roll?
Senators Wynn, Titus, Taylor, Assembly Members Anderson, Brown May, Dickman, Hibbets, Mosca, Chair Watts.
And I am here. Thank you. We have all members present. We have a quorum. We will be closing multiple budgets in the Department of Public Safety today. We're going to pretty much jump right in. We will have a public comment period at the end of today's meeting. If you'd like to provide public comment, we'll be limiting it to 2 minutes. You can provide that in person in Carson City, Las Vegas, or you can call in, and the call-in information is on our agenda, which is also posted on the Nevada Legislature's website. So, with that, we are going to dive right in, and I will turn it over to Mr. Weber to begin walking us through the closing document.
Good morning, Chair Watts and members of the subcommittee. I'm Tom Weber, Program Analyst with the LCB Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. This morning, I'll be presenting the closing documents for 14 Department of Public Safety budget accounts, 5 of which were previously heard by the subcommittee, and 9 of which are recommended as staff closed budgets, for which no major issues were identified. The first budget account for the subcommittee's consideration is the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination budget account, discussion of which begins on page 3 of the closing packet. So on page 3, the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination budget account is funded entirely with general fund appropriations. There is one major closing issue in this budget account, which pertains to the transfer of the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination to the Office of the Chief Information Officer. The Office of the Chief Information Officer operates as an internal service fund, and as such, the entire cost of services provided by the OCIO must be recovered through user fees. Because the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination is funded entirely by general fund appropriations and not user fees or assessments recovered from serviced agencies, adjustments are required to successfully transfer the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination to the Office of the Chief Information Officer, OCIO. According to the OCIO, the centralization of cybersecurity activities would streamline efforts, eliminate redundancies, and provide a more cohesive and effective response to cybersecurity threats. I'm on page 4. According to the OCIO, neither a rate nor assessment has been developed to support the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination over the 2025-2027 biennium if the transfer of the cyber defense budget account to the OCIO were to be approved, and general fund appropriations are recommended by the governor to support operations for the entirety of the 2025-2027 biennium. A budget implementation bill is associated with this recommendation, but it does not modify the funding mechanism. In discussion with the agency and Governor's Finance Office, it was determined a general fund loan may be a viable option, which could allow the agency to begin operations to relocate under the OCIO and allow time for a rate and customer base to be developed for submission to and consideration by the 84th 2027 legislature. General fund loans have been utilized previously by the OCIO for capital or other large expenditures with a typical 4-year repayment term beginning the biennium following the issuance of the loan. And if approved, direct general fund appropriations would be removed from this budget account consistent with statute. If not approved, general fund appropriations would remain, and the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination would continue to operate under the Department of Public Safety. If the subcommittee recommends approving the transfer of the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination to the OCIO, it may also wish to recommend the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to report to the Interim Finance Committee by July 1st, 2026 on progress made in obtaining a customer base and developing a sustainable rate or assessment. The Governor's Finance Office and the agency support funding the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination with a general fund loan. As shown on page 6 of the closing packet, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the transfer of the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination budget account from the Department of Public Safety to the Office of the Chief Information Officer, provide a general fund loan to support the activities in the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination budget account over the 2025-2027 biennium, remove all general fund appropriations in the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination budget account, and direct the agency to develop a rate or assessment methodology for presentation to the 2027 legislature, contingent upon approval of enabling legislation, including a one-time general fund appropriation loan, or not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination to the OCIO in the 2025-2027 biennium, and direct the agency to return to a future legislative session with a plan to transfer the office that includes a developed funding mechanism. And recommend the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to report to the Interim Finance Committee by July 1st, 2026 on the progress made in obtaining a customer base and developing a sustainable rate or assessment for the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination.
Thank you. Members, any questions on this item? I will say that, in general, we want to make sure that we have full implementation plans for things like this, including these moves, to make sure that the necessary budgetary changes can be made. So I'll turn it over to Chair Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I recommend that the subcommittee go forward with recommendation number 1 and number 3.
All right, I have got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. Also shown on page 6 of the closing packet are 3 other closing items. And regarding other closing item 3, if the subcommittee recommends approval of transferring the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination to the OCIO, which it just did, technical adjustments to remove the cost allocation expenses would be required, as the cyber defense budget account would no longer be receiving services from the Department of Public Safety. And fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to remove cost allocation expenses. As such, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 and 2 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 3 be closed with the noted technical adjustment to remove cost allocation expenses for the Department of Public Safety. If the recommended transfer of the Nevada Office of Cyber Defense Coordination budget account to the Office of the Chief Information Officer is approved, and requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, members. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. I'll now move on to the second budget account for the subcommittee's consideration, discussion of which begins on page 9 of the closing packet and is for the Division of Parole and Probation budget account. This budget account is funded primarily with general fund appropriations along with various fees and charges. Pursuant to NRS 176161, this budget account is also supported by county reimbursements for 70% of the cost of pre-sentence investigation reports. There are 4 major closing issues with the Division of Parole and Probation budget account. The first of which pertains to caseload changes, shown in decision units M201, M202, and M204. As discussed on the bottom of page 9, and as originally submitted, the agency estimated position changes needed due to caseload adjustments based on internal projections rather than utilizing an independent contractor as required pursuant to statute. And additionally, changes to the previously legislatively approved caseload ratios were included in standard caseload decision units. On page 10, as originally submitted, the agency used past actual data and applied various annual growth rates to make staffing adjustments for the standard caseload decision units in M201, M202, and M204. And so I'm moving on to page 12. There's the table on the top of page 12 shows updated staffing ratios as were originally included in the standard caseload decision units. And the change in projection methodology between the previous contractor-driven analysis and projections provided by the agency for the 2025-2027 biennium made comparison between the current and future biennia difficult. During the February 14th budget hearing, the subcommittee inquired about the governor's finance office entering into a contract with a vendor that would not be able to provide projected parole and probation caseload information until after the 83rd 2025 legislative session concluded. And in response, the governor's finance office indicated it was entering into a short-term contract with James F. Austin and Associates, which was the vendor previously used, and updated caseload projections would be available within a few weeks. As a result, updated caseload projections were provided to fiscal staff on March 17th. There were some errors discovered in the updated projections, which fiscal staff worked with the agency to resolve. Updated projections and corrections were provided on April 25th and on April 27th, resulting in revisions to caseload adjustments and total expenses of $2.4 million. This is a $2.6 million additional general fund appropriations and a $229,000 reduction in county reimbursement revenue over the 2025-2027 biennium. While the updates represent significant changes to the caseload as recommended by the governor, they appear to generally align with previously legislatively approved ratios, notwithstanding noted exceptions. However, a budget amendment to address the addition of $2.6 million in general fund appropriations over the 2025-2027 biennium was not submitted. So I'll move on to page 13. There's the table on the top of page 13. It shows the revenue impact of the updated caseloads as provided by JFA when compared to caseload information that was originally included in the governor's recommended budget. So you can see, as discussed, the updated caseloads did result in the net addition of $2.6 million in general fund appropriations in that general fund difference column when compared with the governor's recommended budget. As recommended by the governor, caseload updates would have resulted in $3.2 million general fund reduction. And as updated by JFA in March, caseload updates resulted in approximately 566,000 general fund reduction for that net difference of $2.6 million in general funds over the 2025-2027 biennium. The caseload decision units that were mentioned, decision units M201, M202, and M204, and now M203, as included with the updated caseloads, are described and summarized on pages 13 and 14. And as shown on page 14, the decision for the subcommittee is related to, the decision related to major closing issue 1 should be considered in combination with major closing issue 2. So if it's all right, I'll keep moving. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair Watts. So major closing issue 2, as submitted, decision unit E283 made adjustments to caseload supervision ratios. And as submitted, it resulted in the elimination of 13 vacant positions and the addition of 23 new non-caseload driven positions and associated operating costs. and it impacted the M201, M202, and M204 standard caseload decision units. E283 also adjusted the division's legislatively approved staffing ratios to create new positions not tied to caseloads for administrative and operational tasks. It updated staffing levels based on new supervision needs and added civilian support roles. The adjustments to the legislatively approved caseload ratios as originally proposed in E283, as it was submitted in the governor's recommended budget, those adjustments are shown in the table on the top of page 15. And the impacts of the revised ratios are also discussed on page 15. As submitted in the governor's recommended budget, Decision Unit E283 would have resulted in the addition of 23 non-caseload driven positions, which are summarized there on page 15. At the time of the hearing, and given the statutory requirement for an independent contractor to project parole and probation caseloads, the loss of the previously utilized contractor, and the recent acquisition of a new contractor, it was unknown why the governor recommended a restructure of caseload-driven ratios and associated methodologies for the 2025-2027 biennium. And so on page 16, hearing discussion and post-hearing update information following the February 14th budget hearing, and based on updated projections provided in March and revised in April, the agency updated several components of the recommendation to adjust caseload staffing ratios and associated methodology. As summarized on pages 16 and 17. And you can see that those non-caseload driven positions still exist in E283. And as adjusted, Decision Unit 2 E283 would not make any adjustments to caseload supported positions and would instead increase non-caseload supported positions by 26 in each year of the 2025-2027 biennium. And caseload-driven positions have now been separated into distinct decision units. And as mentioned, the non-caseload supported positions are outlined on page 16 and are similar to what was included originally in E283. So I'm on page 17. I need to make a correction to the first sentence in the last paragraph, where it says, when compared to the updated caseload decision units in Major Closing Issue 1, the proposed updates to ratios and methodology would reduce general fund appropriations by $1.7 million in both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, including a net reduction of one position. So it's just one position, and not a net reduction of 5 positions. And I also will update that in the tables on page 18. So when compared to the updated caseload decision units in Major Closing Issue 1, using updated JFA data, the proposed updates to ratios and methodologies in Major Closing Issue 2 would reduce general fund appropriations, by $1.7 million in both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. Table 1 on the bottom of page 17 displays the net impact of caseloads as originally included in the governor's recommended budget, using the non-legislatively approved staffing ratios in the standard caseload decision units. And as previously discussed, those caseload updates resulted in a $3.2 million general fund reduction. So the table 2 on the top of page 18, excuse me. Table 2 displays the net impact of caseloads as updated by James F. Austin and Associates in April 2025, and using legislatively approved staffing ratios. And when compared to the caseload ratios in the governor's recommended budget, this results in that additional general funds appropriations of $2.6 million. Table 3 displays the net impact of caseloads as updated by JFA, but includes the agency's proposed updated staffing ratios in decision units M206 and M207. So you can see now that M206 and M207 in Table 3 have replaced decision units M202 and M203 that are in Table 2. And decision units M206 and M207 would replace decision units M202 and M203 and should be considered along with decision unit E283. Decision units M201 and 204 remain unaffected. And in line with my previous adjustment on page 17 to the net reduction of one position, the last column in Table 3 of the net positions, M206 would result in a net reduction of 28 positions, not 34. There was an error in my workbook. I didn't include a certain cell for just that specific cell. That changed the overall net reduction of positions in the updated methodology from a net 2 positions to a net 8 positions. You can see the difference of 6 positions there. Table 4 displays the difference between the agency's proposed updating staffing ratios and the caseload updates provided by James F. Austin and Associates. So Table 4 is the difference between Table 3 and Table 2. As shown, decision units M201 and M204 would be included in either scenario. And as was mentioned, the agency is seeking to create new positions not tied to caseloads for administrative and operational tasks, update staffing levels based on new supervision needs, and add civilian support roles. So that I will move on to the decision for the subcommittee on page 19, which is in compliance with NRS 176-0129, which requires the agency to utilize the caseload projections developed by an independent contractor, caseload updates as reflected in the March 2025 update provided by James F. Austin and Associates, and as described in Major Closing Issue 1, are incorporated in the decision options below. Does the subcommittee wish to, number 1, recommend approval of decision units M201, M202, M203, and M204 as presented in Major Closing Issue 1, and not recommend approval of decision unit E283, which would continue the existing methodology for determining staffing ratios and would result in general fund reductions totaling $565,636 and county reimbursement increases totaling $1.2 million over the 2025-2027 biennium, and that was shown in Table 2. Or does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of decision units M201, M206, M207, M204, and E283 as presented in Major Closing Issue 2 to change the methodology for determining staffing ratios as proposed by the agency, and not recommend approval of decision units M202 and M203, which would result in general fund reductions totaling $4 million and county reimbursement increases totaling $1.2 million over the 2025-2027 biennium as displayed in Table 3.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber, for walking us through that. A lot of moving pieces here. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Chair Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we recommend option number 2 as read by staff.
All right, we have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. The third major closing issue for this budget account, as shown on page 19, relates to 2 new administrative services officer positions. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of approximately $179,000 in fiscal year 26 and $228,000 in fiscal year 27 to fund 2 administrative services officer positions and associated operating costs beginning in October 2025 to support the court services unit. According to the agency, pre-sentence investigation reports were previously written by sworn officer positions managed by 3 DPS lieutenant positions within the court services unit. The agency indicates that in 2005, the sworn officer positions responsible for writing the reports were decommissioned to non-sworn personnel, but sworn DPS lieutenant positions have still been responsible for managing the unit. To expand the career path for non-sworn personnel in the court services unit and to align management of the unit to non-sworn staff, the governor recommends the addition of 2 non-sworn administrative services officer positions. So on page 20, as noted, the governor's recommended budget includes 2 new administrative services officer positions, which, if approved, the agency plans to reclassify to parole and probation manager positions, which is not currently an approved class specification. But the agency indicated that it is unsure when the new position series would be created for the parole and probation manager positions. During the budget hearing, the subcommittee inquired about the need to maintain the 3 existing DPS lieutenant positions if the recommended administrative services officer positions are approved to oversee the court services unit. And in response, the agency indicated the number of DPS lieutenant positions are calculated and based on staffing ratios for sworn positions, and that approval of the administrative services officer positions will allow the DPS lieutenants to resume their normal duties and operations. And the agency further indicated the administrative services officer positions would be the appropriate class specification to manage the court services unit if its request to create the parole and probation manager class series was not approved by the Division of Human Resource Management. And as such, and as shown on page 20, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $178,787 in fiscal year 26 and $228,444 in fiscal year 27 to fund 2 new administrative services officer positions and associated operating costs to support the court services unit.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll turn it over for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
All right, we've got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. The 4th major closing issue, as shown on page 20, relates to a new program officer position. Assembly Bill 440 of the 81st 2021 legislative session amended NRS 171-1771 and required misdemeanor citations be issued in lieu of arrest for certain violations. To comply with the provisions of Assembly Bill 440, the governor recommends 1 new program officer position to manage the Division of Parole and Probation's citation program. In addition to the new program officer position, the governor recommends funding for citation issuance support software to allow ease of tracking and maintenance of citations issued. So on page 21, in post-hearing update information, the agency indicated if the recommended program officer position and software were not approved, its officers would continue relying on allied agencies such as the Nevada Highway Patrol for assistance when issuing citations to people who are not on parole or probation. The agency further indicated while its intent is to comply with the statute as written, which requires all peace officers to have the ability to write citations, its officers rarely issue citations, and when they do, the citation is issued to someone that is not on supervision that has committed a misdemeanor crime in an officer's presence. And according to the agency, it could continue contacting allied agencies such as the Nevada Highway Patrol to issue citations in the rare occasions they are needed. So as shown on page 21, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $254,037 in fiscal year '26 and $217,471 in fiscal year '27 to fund one program officer position and associated operating costs, as well as contractual costs to support the issuance of citations.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Chair Taylor.
Thank you, Chair Watts. For this decision unit, I recommend that we do not go with the recommendation as read by staff. I move that we do not go with the recommendation as read by staff.
So we have the motion to not approve, or to recommend not approving this item as from Chair Taylor, second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. And as shown on page 21 and 22 of the closing packet, there are 16 other closing items recommended by the governor for the parole and probation budget account. Other closing item 16, shown on page 22, pertains to the transfer in of 4 DPS officer positions and is associated operating costs from the training division budget account to this budget account. And this was discussed on February 14th and is related and contingent upon approval of that major issue in the training division budget account. It's for the rotating pool of training officers. So as such, on page 22, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 15 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 16 be closed contingent upon and consistent with major closing issue 4 in the training division budget account, and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, turn it over for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff and also allow give staff the authority to make any technical adjustments necessary.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, second from Vice Chair Brown May. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
The third budget account for the subcommittee's consideration begins on page 23 of the closing packet and is the Central Repository for Nevada Records of Criminal History budget account. The Central Repository for Nevada Records of Criminal History, also known as the Criminal History Repository, administers the Nevada Criminal Justice Information System, in CJIS, and is the state's clearinghouse for criminal history records information and crime scene statistics. The budget account is primarily funded by general fund appropriations, user fees generated from civil fingerprint checks, and various background checks for purchasing firearms and prospective employment. There are 3 major closing issues for this budget account, the first of which pertains to general fund appropriations to support the criminal history repository. General fund appropriations are recommended to replace court administrative assessment revenue and reserve balance reductions previously utilized by the agency to support the ongoing operation of the criminal history repository budget account. However, the agency has not adjusted fee revenue, instead recommending all expenditure growth be supported by general fund appropriations. So I'm on page 24. In exchange for foregoing court administrative assessment revenue and liquidating the reserve balance, the agency was directed to approach the 83rd 2025 legislature with a request to utilize general fund appropriations to support the operations of the criminal history repository budget account. However, no policy or limitation relating to the total general fund available to be requested by the agency was established. As shown in the table on page 24, between fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 23, court assessment revenue provided between 22.2% and 23.8% of the operating authority for this budget account, averaging 23%. However, as recommended by the governor, general fund appropriations excluding those to support the NCGIS ongoing maintenance, which are discussed in Major Issue 3, would support 32.8% and 33.2% of the operating expenses for this budget account in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. And that is shown in the table on the top of page 25. So on page 25, according to the agency, increased expenses primarily supported by recommended general fund appropriations are attributable to fee revenue remaining relatively flat over the 2021-2023 biennium and the current biennium, and additional positions added over the previous two biennium, as well as costs associated with increased office space for new positions, legislatively approved cost of living increases, and increased travel for the NCGIS compliance unit. During the February 14th budget hearing, the subcommittee inquired why the agency did not contemplate increasing its fees to offset increases in expenses recommended over the 2025-2027 biennium, which would reduce the need for general fund appropriations. In response, the agency indicated that its civil applicant fingerprint fees were increased by $3.50 in 2019 to support NCGIS modernization and to supplement increasing costs to support the criminal history repository budget account. Nevada Revised Statutes 179A-140 provides the Records, Communications, and Compliance Division with authority to charge a reasonable fee for information relating to records of criminal history, and while not required to do so, the agency makes the request to adjust its fees through the legislative process to ensure transparency. And the agency's current fee schedule and when its fees were last adjusted are shown in the table on the bottom of page 25. During the budget hearing, the agency also indicated it was analyzing its current fee structure to ensure the fees charged for its services are fair, while allowing the agency to cover program operational costs. The findings of the fee study were provided to fiscal staff on April 7th, and the results of which consider options for increasing current fees or adding new fees. The fee study outlined the potential for additional fee revenue totaling between $1.2 million and $4.1 million annually if the three primary fees were increased between $3 and $10 per transaction, as shown in the table on page 26. The study also considered the addition of a sex offender registry fee, ranging from $25 to $150 per year, which could generate between $188,000 and $1.1 million annually. To the extent the subcommittee may wish to limit general fund appropriations used to support ongoing operations of the criminal history repository budget account, and to encourage adjustments to fee revenues to support a proportionate share of the budget account, the subcommittee may wish to consider a budget policy that restricts total appropriations to the historical level of funding provided by the court administrative assessment fee revenues, which addressed approximately 23% of the budget's expenditures. Based on the governor's recommended budget for fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, excluding decision units associated with ongoing NCGIS operating expenses, which are discussed in Major Closing Issue 2, restricting general fund appropriations to 23% of the budget would reduce general fund appropriations by $2.4 million in fiscal year 26 and $2.5 million in fiscal year 27. However, it may not be reasonable for the agency to increase its fees beginning July 1st, as the agency may require time to prepare, advertise, and implement fee changes. If a general fund policy is recommended, the subcommittee may wish to recommend the issuance of a letter of intent instructing the agency to provide a report to the Interim Finance Committee recommending fee increases beginning either fiscal year 27 or fiscal year 28, depending on which, if any, policy is recommended for approval. As shown on page 27 of the closing packet, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of, 1, a budget policy restricting the total amount of general fund appropriations to the Criminal History Repository budget account totaling 23% of the revenue supporting the budget account, excluding ongoing operation of the INCEGIS, to apply to the agency beginning in fiscal year 2028. This option would have no impact on general fund appropriations or fee revenues over the 2025-2027 biennium, and the agency would be directed to research and recommend adjustments to fee revenues for presentation to and consideration by the 2027 legislature. Option 2, a budget policy restricting the total amount of general fund appropriations made to the Criminal History Repository budget account totaling 23% of the revenue supporting the budget account, excluding ongoing operation of the INCEGIS, to apply to the agency beginning in fiscal year 27. This option would decrease general fund appropriations by $2.5 million and increase fee revenue by the same amount in fiscal year 27. The agency would be directed to research and implement adjustments to fee revenues beginning July 1st, 2026. And then option 3, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations totaling $8.1 million in fiscal year 26 and $8.2 million in fiscal year 27 to support the Criminal History Repository budget account as recommended by the governor, with no budget policy relating to the amount of general fund appropriations received by the Criminal History Repository? If option 1 or option 2 is recommended for approval, does the subcommittee wish to recommend the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to provide a report to the Interim Finance Committee, including fee increase recommendations beginning in fiscal year 27? So that's option 2, with a report due May 1st, 2026, or fiscal year 28, option 1, with a report due August 1st, 2026.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I will turn it over to Chair Taylor for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. In this case this morning, committee, I'm going to recommend an alternative motion. I move that we recommend approval of a budget policy restricting the total amount of general fund appropriations made to the Criminal History Repository budget account totaling 23% of the revenue supporting the budget account, excluding ongoing operation of the INCEGIS, to apply to the agency beginning fiscal year 2027. This option would decrease general fund appropriations by $2.5 million and increase fee revenue by the same amount in fiscal year 2027, requiring the agency to research and implement adjustments to fees charged beginning July 1, 2026. Additionally, I recommend the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to provide a semi-annual report to the Interim Finance Committee on its progress in developing a fee structure to generate 77% of funding, excluding ongoing operations of INCEGIS, in alignment with a 23% cap on general fund appropriations beginning in fiscal year 2027, with the same semi-annual report due December 31st, 2025.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Yes, Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification. So this proposal includes, will they be increasing their fees now or still evaluating that?
Thank you. So essentially, in order to meet the budget request that they would have essentially another year to finish evaluating and figuring out where they go. So they've gotten a fee study completed. They now need to figure out what mix they're going to bring forward in order to ensure that the amount of general funds supporting this budget is in line with the amount of court assessment fees that were originally supporting this budget. And then they would need to make those fee increases by the beginning of fiscal year 2027. So that would be July 1, 2026.
Thank you for that. But this does not authorize them to go ahead and do those fee increases without coming back to us?
So either Mr. Weber or the agency might be able to speak to that. I believe they already have authority to make those adjustments, but they would be coming to us. And the other thing with the letter of intent would be providing us updates so that we are looped in and aware of those plans as they move forward.
Thank you. That answers my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any additional questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. The second major closing issue for this budget account, as shown on page 27, pertains to maintenance of the Nevada Criminal Justice Information System and the elimination of American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund Authority. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $8.3 million over the 2025-2027 biennium to support ongoing licensing and maintenance expenses for the NCGIS, in addition to the elimination of ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund Authority. General fund appropriations are recommended to replace ARPA funds previously approved to support the maintenance of the NCGIS project. The Criminal History Repository has been modernizing NCGIS since the 2013-2015 biennium. I'm on page 28. The 82nd 2023 legislature approved an allocation of $19.4 million in ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds for use over the 2023-2025 biennium to support the NCGIS modernization project in lieu of general fund appropriations. To support ongoing maintenance of NCGIS over the 2025-2027 biennium, the governor recommends 3 decision units, as discussed and summarized on page 28. Decision Unit E225, the governor recommends $4.5 million in fiscal year 26 and $3.6 million in fiscal year 27 to fund maintenance and ongoing support costs for the NCGIS program. Under terms of the vendor contracts, the agency indicates NCGIS maintenance costs would actually be $3.6 million in both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, which is a difference of $866,832 when compared to the original $4.5 million recommended in fiscal year 26. So as such, the governor's finance office submitted a budget amendment to remove that approximate $867,000 in general fund appropriations in fiscal year 26 intended for one-time consulting costs, and to instead fund the consulting costs with one-time general fund appropriations. And another decision unit by which the governor is recommending general fund appropriations to support ongoing NCGIS is ongoing maintenance is E236. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $112,773 in fiscal year 26 and approximately $53,000 in fiscal year 27 to extend 2 contracts to assist with the implementation of the NCGIS modernization project. As discussed in Major Issue 1, the governor recommends all ongoing maintenance expenses associated with the NCGIS be funded with general fund appropriations. No fee revenue increases or changes to the fee structure were recommended in the Criminal History Repository budget account. And then Decision Unit E499 deals with the elimination of the ARPA funds that will be expended and are not needed in the 2025-2027 biennium. During the February 14th budget hearing, as shown on the top of page 29, the subcommittee inquired why the governor did not recommend proportional fee increases to support a portion of the Criminal History Repository maintenance expenses. In response, the agency indicated because it had previously had been accumulating excess reserves from all its fees and was holding a substantial reserve balance, it was instructed by the 82nd 2023 legislature to utilize its fee reserves for eligible expenditures and to eliminate its reserve balance by fiscal year 25. resulting in the need to now request general fund appropriations to support increases or enhancements in the criminal history repository budget account. Follow-up information provided by the agency after the budget hearing indicated anticipated ongoing costs for the NCGIS would be approximately $5.4 million in fiscal year 28 and $5.5 million in fiscal year 29. Similar to major closing issue 1, the subcommittee may wish to consider applying a general fund budget policy to appropriations provided to the criminal history repository budget account related to ongoing operation of the NCGIS. Based on recommended general fund appropriations, applying a 23% limit would reduce general fund appropriations by $3.5 million in fiscal year 26 and $2.8 million in fiscal year 27. However, options presented for consideration, which are discussed on the next page, allow time for the agency to research, adjust, and advertise fee changes and do not recommend any adjustments to occur in fiscal year 26. So, as shown on page 30 of the closing packet, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of decision units E225 and E236, which recommend general fund appropriations totaling $3.7 million in each year of the 2025-2027 biennium to support ongoing license and maintenance of the Nevada Criminal Justice Information System, including Budget Amendment A251804709. Additionally, recommend a budget policy restricting the total amount of general fund appropriations to support ongoing license and maintenance of the Nevada Criminal Justice Information System, totaling 23% of associated expenses, to apply to the agency beginning in fiscal year 28. This option would have no impact on general fund appropriations or fee revenues over the 2025-2027 biennium, and the agency would be directed to research and recommend adjustments to fee revenues for presentation to and consideration by the 2027 legislature. Or decision number 2, decision units E225 and E236 recommend general fund appropriations of $3.7 million in fiscal year 26 and $3.7 million, of which $844,651 would be general funds and $2.8 million would be fee revenue in fiscal year 27 to support ongoing license and maintenance of the Nevada Criminal Justice Information System, including Budget Amendment A251804709. Additionally, recommend a policy restricting the total amount of general fund appropriations to support ongoing license and maintenance of the Nevada Criminal Justice Information System, totaling 23% of associated expenses, to apply to the agency beginning in fiscal year 27. This option would decrease general fund appropriations by $2.8 million and increase fee revenue by the same amount in fiscal year 27. The agency would be directed to research and implement adjustments to fee revenues beginning July 1st, 2026. Or, option 3, recommend general fund appropriations totaling $3.7 million in each year of the 2025-2027 biennium to support the Criminal History Repository budget account as recommended by the governor, including Budget Amendment A251804709, with no budget policy restricting the amount of general fund appropriations received by the Criminal History Repository. And Decision Unit E499, recommend elimination of ARPA, Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund Authority, of $8.7 million in each year of the 2025-2027 biennium previously approved to support the NCGIS modernization project.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I will turn it over to Chair Taylor for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I have a recommendation to the subcommittee for an alternative motion, and actually, Senator Titus, this answer a little bit of the question you just asked as well. I move that for decision units E225 and E236, I move approval of general fund appropriations totaling $3.7 million in each of the 25 through 27 biennium, each year of the biennium, to support ongoing license and maintenance of the NCGIS system, including Budget Amendment A251804709. Additionally, I recommend the budget policy restricting the total amount of general fund appropriations to support ongoing license and maintenance of the NCGIS system, totaling 23% of associated expenses, to apply to the agency beginning in fiscal year 2028. I also recommend adding to the letter of intent issued in Major Closing Issue 1 that we just approved, a provision to include fee increase recommendations to support ongoing license and maintenance of the NCGIS system. And on Decision Unit E499, I recommend elimination of ARPA Coronavirus State Recovery Fund Authority of $8.7 million in each year of the 25 through 27 biennium previously approved to support the NCGIS modernization project.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May, and as I open it up for discussion, I think, as we had conversations about this, we understand the needs that the agency has. While I have concerns about how high the costs are for the continued maintenance of the NCGIS system, we understand that we need to, those are costs that we're going to need to cover. And, while we definitely wanted to move away from the court assessments, I think there's definitely concern about rapid shifts in the budget to increase reliance on the general fund. And so, while we're setting this budget policy with that target based on the historic amount of court assessments as a percentage of the budget, I think the bottom line is we want to make sure that we're not running to extra general fund to cover expenses, and that we're figuring out how to maintain a balance, and again, looking to that fee study for how we make sure that we have a balance of funding to support the ongoing needs in this budget. And we also understand that we don't want to move dramatically in that direction. So looking at some of the information that was provided by the agency, we think this kind of phased-in approach makes sense, where we start to take some action in fiscal year 2027, and then we hope that both as the agency is building their budget for the next biennium, as well as through these regular updates to the Interim Finance Committee, we kind of see what that phased-in approach looks like to make sure that we've got a continued balance of funding. So just appreciate some of the information that the agency did provide to us, and want to make clear about kind of how we'd like to see things move forward from here. So any additional discussion from members of the subcommittee? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. The third major closing issue for the Criminal History Repository budget account begins on page 30 and pertains to the transfer of 3 NCGIS modernization support positions. So I'm on page 31. During the 82nd 2023 legislative session, the agency was approved for 7 positions to support the NCGIS modernization, and indicated those positions would be transferred to the DPS Director's Office budget account during the 2025-2027 biennium, following completion of the modernization project in fiscal year 25. It appears the agency plans to retain 5 of those 7 positions to support additional enhancements to the NCGIS modernization project beyond what were legislatively approved by the 82nd legislature. According to the agency, it is retaining 5 of the positions previously assigned to the NCGIS modernization project in the Criminal History Repository budget account to replace the Sex Offender Registry and Protection Order Repository, as well as implement additional enhancements to the NCGIS that were not previously legislatively approved. Limited information was provided regarding the additional enhancements not previously considered in the NCGIS modernization project, and suggest new items could include a ticketing system, automated manual updates, the addition of a centralized service desk, but it is unclear how the additional enhancements would be funded. Additionally, the governor recommends one-time general fund appropriations of $4.9 million in fiscal year '26 and $6.6 million in fiscal year '27 to fund 7 new positions and associated operating costs to support enhancements to the sex offender registry and protection order programs in the NCGIS. And those 7 positions are outlined on the bottom of page 31, include 1 IT manager position, 3 IT professional positions, and 3 NCGIS program specialist positions. On the top of page 32, it just describes that the governor is also recommending one-time general fund appropriations of $1.4 million in fiscal year '26 and $300,000 in fiscal year '27 to fund the Unisys contract beyond June 30th, 2025 for rework stemming from delays in the NCGIS modernization project due to incomplete partner interfaces. And in post-hearing update information, the agency indicated 4 of the 5 business process analyst positions would be needed to support moving the sex offender registry, protection order programs, and other public safety programs, in addition to the 7 positions recommended in the one-time general fund appropriation noted previously. As associated enhancements will be reviewed and considered in a future bill hearing, continuation of 4 business process analyst positions in the base budget should be approved contingent upon approval of the associated one-time general fund recommendation. And as shown on page 32 of the closing packet, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend recommend transferring 2 business process analysts, 1 accounting assistant, and associated operating costs from the Criminal History Repository budget account to the DPS Director's Office budget account? Additionally, does the subcommittee wish to recommend the continuation of 4 business process analyst positions and associated expenses in the base budget, contingent upon the approval of associated one-time general fund appropriations recommended by the governor to support Nevada Criminal Justice Information System enhancements related to the sex offender registry and protection order programs in legislation for one-time general fund appropriations?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Chair Taylor for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'd like to recommend an alternative motion. I move that we transfer 7 business process analysts, 1 accounting assistant, and associated operating costs from the Criminal History Repository budget account to the DPS Director's Office budget account, consistent with the agreement made with the agency during the 82nd legislative session in 2023, in which it would submit a request to transfer the remaining 7 NCGIS modernization staff to the Director's Research and Planning Technology team in fiscal year 2026 upon completion of the NCGIS modernization project.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor. We have a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. As shown on pages 32 and 33 of the closing packet, there are 11 other closing items. On page 33, other closing item 10 relates to the changing 1 unclassified administrator position to an unclassified deputy administrator position beginning fiscal year '26. Decisions pertaining to unclassified salaries and position changes will be determined by the money committees when the pay bill is considered. And other closing item 11 relates to the enrollment in the FBI Next Generation Identification Program. And fiscal staff recommends this decision unit be approved contingent upon the passage and approval of Senate Bill 26 or other enabling legislation. So as such, and as shown on page 33, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 9 be closed as recommended by the governor, other closing item 10 consistent with the pay bill, other closing item 11 contingent upon the passage and approval of Senate Bill 26 or other enabling legislation, and request authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations as read by staff and that we give them authority to make any technical adjustments necessary.
I've got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. The fourth budget account for the subcommittee's consideration begins on page 35, and it's for the Records, Communications, and Compliance Division budget account. This budget account funds the Communications Bureau, which is staffed by non-sworn positions that provide 24/7 radio dispatch services and communication support via 2 regional centers in Carson City and Las Vegas. There is one major closing issue for this budget account, which pertains to the continuation of administrative assistant positions to support dispatch workload. To help address staffing concerns with the public safety dispatcher classification, the governor recommends continuing 4 administrative assistant positions added by the agency over the 2023-2024 interim to alleviate some administrative burden placed on public safety dispatcher positions. Through vacancy savings, 4 administrative assistant positions were added to the Records, Communications, and Compliance Division budget account in April of 2024. And the agency notified the Interim Finance Committee of the action at its June 13th meeting through the submission of an informational item. However, as vacancy savings were utilized to fund the positions, no work program was necessary. So on page 36, post-hearing update information. During the March 5th budget hearing, the subcommittee inquired about how the utilization of 4 administrative assistant positions over the interim impacted the overtime worked and retention rate of public safety dispatcher positions. In response, the agency indicated the additional administrative support had neither impacted the amount of overtime worked or improved the retention rate of its public safety dispatcher positions. However, the agency acknowledged not all the administrative assistant positions were filled, and because the positions did not become effective until July 1st, insufficient time had passed to effectively gauge the impact that those positions had had on the workload of public safety dispatchers. As of April 24th, 2025, according to the state's HR database, two of the 4 associated administrative assistant positions and 34 of 57 public safety dispatcher positions were filled. So, as shown on page 36 of the closing packet, the decision for the subcommittee is: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of cost allocation reimbursements of $337,688 in fiscal year 26 and $336,561 in fiscal year 27 to continue to fund 4 administrative assistant positions and associated operating costs to support public safety dispatcher positions?
Thank you, members. Any questions on this? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. One more change from the motion standpoint that's in our packet. I move that we recommend approval of cost allocation reimbursements to continue to fund 2 administrative assistant positions and these associated operating costs to support public safety dispatcher positions.
I have a motion. Do I have a I have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. And as shown on pages 36 and 37 of the closing packet, there are 3 other closing items recommended by the governor. Other closing item 3 on page 37 relates to additional funding for a new office location in Las Vegas. That was discussed in the DPS Director's Office budget account on February 14th, and this recommendation is contingent upon approval of the associated major closing issue 4 in the DPS Director's Office budget account. As such, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 and 2 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 3, contingent upon and consistent with the associated major closing issue 4 in the DPS Director's Office budget account, and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff and that we authorize staff to have to make the technical adjustments that's necessary.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. The fifth budget account for the subcommittee's consideration begins on page 39 and is for the State Fire Marshal budget account. The mission of the State Fire Marshal is to reduce the loss of life and property from fire and hazardous material incidents through training, investigation, inspections, licensing, permitting, informational programs, plan reviews, and the adoption of regulations designed to minimize injury and exposure to injury of the general public and to the emergency responder. This budget account is primarily funded by fees and surcharges associated with licensing, permitting, and inspection activities, in addition to a surcharge on chemical waste disposed of at the hazardous waste disposal facility near Beatty, Nevada. There are 5 major closing issues for this budget account, the first of which pertains to fee revenues to support the State Fire Marshal budget account over the 2025-2027 biennium. The projected revenue for the 3 primary fees in the executive budget for the State Fire Marshal did not align with the agency's projections. During the budget hearing, I'm on page 40, during the budget hearing, the agency indicated that positions being requested in enhancement units may generate additional fee revenue that was not considered in its original revenue projections or enhancement units. And then following the budget hearing, the agency provided updated fee revenue projections for the State Fire Marshal budget account, which reflect fee revenue totaling $4.6 million in fiscal year 26 and $4.7 million in fiscal year 27, which appear reasonable to fiscal staff. Based on these updated projections, fiscal staff recommends technical adjustments to correct the State Fire Marshal's fee revenue projections, resulting in $56,000 in fiscal year 26 and approximately $29,000 in fiscal year 27 being added to reserves, which is shown in the table on page 40. The last difference column there shows the amounts that would be added to reserve. So the decision for the subcommittee, as shown on page 40, is does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $9.3 million in fee-based revenues, $2.2 million licenses and fees, $2.6 million certificates, $4.5 million plan review fees over the 2025-2027 biennium to support the State Fire Marshal budget account, including the noted technical adjustments.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. As shown on page 40, the second major closing issue for this budget account pertains to a fire and explosion investigation position. The governor recommends fee revenue of approximately $196,000 in fiscal year 26 and approximately $154,000 in fiscal year 27 to fund 1 new DPS officer position and associated operating costs located in Carson City to conduct fire and explosion investigations and to address increased workload. During the budget hearing, and as discussed on page 41, the State Fire Marshal's DPS officer positions, this was discussed during the budget hearing, and those positions travel throughout the state to complete fire and explosion investigations and enforce fire safety regulations. The agency indicated increased workload coupled with population growth and fire and explosion investigators now serving tribal communities necessitates additional resources. In follow-up provided after the hearing, the agency indicated it recorded 40 new fire and explosion investigations in fiscal year 23 and 59 new fire and explosion investigations in fiscal year 24, representing a 47.5% increase when comparing fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 23. The agency further indicated, based on current trends and anticipated population growth, it projects the volume of fire and explosion investigations, along with the need for expanded support, to continue increasing throughout the 2025-2027 biennium. As such, and as shown on page 41, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of fee revenue of $195,930 in fiscal year 26 and $153,549 in fiscal year 27 to fund one new DPS officer position and associated operating costs to support fire and explosion investigation activities for the state fire marshal in Carson City?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
I've got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. The third major closing issue for this budget account, as shown on page 41, is a request for a fire and life safety inspector position, for which the governor recommends one new fire and life safety inspector position located in Carson City. So on page 42, according to the agency, its current inspection program focuses on construction permits, state buildings, and care facilities licensed by the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services. However, the state fire marshal indicates statute also requires annual inspections of various facilities in rural areas that it lacks the personnel and resources to adequately perform inspections on. According to the agency, the one fire and life safety inspector position successfully maintained scheduled inspections for permitted construction projects and certificates of compliance, and the position was able to complete 90% of annual inspections for state-owned and leased buildings. Additionally, the fire inspection responsibilities of approximately 300 child care facilities in Washoe County were redirected to the state fire marshal in August of 2024. And a second full-time fire and life safety inspector position in Northern Nevada, as approved at the December 12th meeting of the Interim Finance Committee, was hired in December of 2024 to address the associated increases in workloads. The agency indicates an additional fire and life safety inspector position is needed to conduct a comprehensive survey of smaller towns and cities in rural Nevada to establish a baseline of businesses falling under the state fire marshal's jurisdiction. In provided follow-up after the budget hearing, the agency indicated it is responsible for the fire and life safety of 3,797 state-owned buildings, 314 state leased buildings, 155 rural schools, 388 Clark County schools, and 800 child care facilities. Per the agency, an additional inspector position would allow for timelier inspections, reduce wait times, enhanced proactive inspections, improve community safety, and would allow for a greater focus on specialized inspections like those involving hazardous materials. So as shown on page 42 of the closing packet, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of fee revenue of $120,711 in fiscal year 26 and $91,932 in fiscal year 27 to fund one new fire and life safety inspector position and associated operating costs to support the state fire marshal's fire inspection activities in Northern Nevada?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
I've got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. The fourth major closing issue for this budget account begins on page 43 and pertains to new positions for the Fire Service Training Bureau. The governor recommends fund transfers and fee revenue to support one new training officer position and one new administrative assistant position to support the state fire marshal's Fire Service Training Bureau. According to the agency, the 3 existing training officer positions in its Fire Service Training Bureau are all located in Carson City, but are responsible for providing fire service training sessions statewide. The agency further indicates current training delivery methods rely on extensive travel and contracted labor, which can create disparities in training opportunities. And that the State Fire Marshal Training Bureau is experiencing a general increase in demand for its training and certification services. And due to that, 1 new administrative assistant position in Carson City is recommended to handle increased administrative tasks currently being performed by training officer positions. During the budget hearing, the subcommittee inquired how an additional training officer position would ensure the fire service training needs of fire departments in Southern Nevada were met. In response, the agency indicated the expansion of the State Fire Marshal's Southern Command, including moving into a dedicated building, has provided the agency with more resources to develop additional curriculum and offer more advanced trainings. And furthermore, having a dedicated training officer position in Southern Nevada would allow the agency to better coordinate with local fire departments to facilitate specialized training classes. The State Fire Marshal testified the additional administrative assistant position would support overall operations of the Fire Service Training Bureau as that bureau continues to expand, and the position would ensure recently hired personnel were efficiently trained. And to allow time for recruitment and onboarding, new positions generally begin in October of a fiscal year. If approved, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to adjust the start date of the position from July to October 2025. So as shown on page 44, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of Decision Unit E301, transfer and fee revenue of $64,597 in fiscal year 26 and $75,252 in fiscal year 27 to fund 1 new administrative assistant position and associated operating costs to support the State Fire Marshal's Fire Service Training Bureau, including the noted technical adjustment, and/or recommend approval of Decision Unit E302, which is the transfer and fee revenue of $151,690 in fiscal year 26 and $101,409 in fiscal year 27 to fund 1 new training officer position and associated operating, equipment, and vehicle costs to support the State Fire Marshal's Fire Service Training Bureau as recommended by the governor.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? We do have some. Go ahead.
Just
Assemblymember
a
Hibbets.
clarification, this is an and/or. I'm just wondering, are we doing and or?
We're doing and.
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 Thank
I
you
move
for
the
clar-
recommendation, let me amend it to be very clear. I move Decision Unit E301 and Decision Unit E302 as read by staff.
Do we have a clarified second? All right. Good job, Assemblymember Hibbets. Even though you interrupted the flow, we're all clear now.
I thought you were asleep too, man.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
As shown on page 44, the 5th major closing issue pertains to a fiscal management support position. The governor recommends transfer and fee revenue to fund 1 new administrative services officer position located in Carson City to manage fiscal operations. The agency indicates a management analyst is currently serving as the fiscal manager and is experiencing difficulty in effectively managing the growing financial demands of the division. And the position experiences a high turnover rate due to an incongruity between the classified position responsibilities and the needs of the division. So, and as shown on page 45 in post-hearing update information, the agency indicated the administrative services officer position would be better able to handle the agency's higher-level fiscal duties, which have become more complex since the State Fire Marshal became a fee-based agency. New positions generally begin in October of a fiscal year, and fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment adjusting the start date of the position from July to October of 2025. So as shown on page 45, the decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of transfer and fee revenue of $92,273 in fiscal year 26 and $113,694 in fiscal year 27 to fund one new administrative services officer position and associated operating costs to manage the financial operations of the state fire marshal, including the noted technical adjustment?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Assemblymember Hibbets? All right, just checking.
I'll
See-
allow it.
Seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Watts. As shown on pages 45 and 46, there are 14 other closing items for the State Fire Marshal budget account. Other closing item 14 on page 46 relates to a Southern Command support position. The governor recommends transfer and fee revenue to fund one new administrative assistant position to address increased workload in the State Fire Marshal's Southern Command. And fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment changing the start date of this position from July to October of 2025. And as such, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 13 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 14 be closed with the noted technical adjustment to change the administrative assistant position start date from July to October of 2025, and request authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. The next 9 budget accounts, beginning on page 47, the subcommittee has not previously heard, for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations. The closing recommendations for these 9 budget accounts are identified on page 65 of the closing packet, which will allow the subcommittee members to make closing recommendations for all 9 budget accounts in one motion. So as shown on page 47, the first budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Child Volunteer Background Checks Trust Account, which funds the costs of the central repository to process requests from nonprofit agencies for information on the background of a volunteer or of a nonprofit agency who works directly with children, or a prospective volunteer of the nonprofit agency who will work directly with children. There is one other closing item in this budget account relating to continuation of language in the 2025 Appropriations Act, and the governor recommends language in the 2025 Appropriations Act providing that the sums appropriated to the Child Volunteer Background Checks Trust Account are available for both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, and may be transferred from one fiscal year to the other with the approval of the Interim Finance Committee upon recommendation of the governor. I'll just keep moving to the staff closed budgets. Thank you, Chair Watts. The second budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the State Emergency Response Commission. This is shown on page 49. The Nevada State Emergency Response Commission, or CERC, is responsible for collecting information from fixed facilities regarding the use and storage of hazardous materials. And there are 5 other closing items as shown on page 49. For other closing item 5, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to align the transfer amounts between the State Emergency Response Commission and then the State Fire Marshal budget account. The third budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for is shown on page 51, and is the Cigarette Fire Safety Standard and Firefighter Protection Fund. This is a special revenue fund for the purpose of supporting fire safety and fire prevention programs. There are no major closing issues identified and no other closing issues identified either. On page 53, the fourth budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Capitol Police budget account. And the Capitol Police provides for the safety of state employees, constitutional officers, state building properties, and the general public on state property on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week. As shown on pages 53 and 54, there are 8 other closing items. Other closing item 6, as shown on page 53, is regarding the Nevada Shared Radio System. The fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to align budgeted expenses in the Capitol Police budget account with the revenue anticipated to be received in the Department of Transportation budget account related to the Nevada Shared Radio System. Other closing item 7 is regarding the new location in Las Vegas, which was discussed in the DPS Director's Office budget account. And other closing item 8 on page 54 is for a new Department of Public Safety Capitol Police Security Services for the Department of Business and Industry's Las Vegas office locations. The governor recommends transfer revenue to fund 1 new DPS sergeant position, 4 new DPS officer positions, and associated travel, operating, and equipment costs to provide Capitol Police coverage at the Department of Business and Industry's office locations in Las Vegas. At the closing of the Business and Industry Administration budget account, before the General Government Joint Subcommittee on April 8th, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to contract with the Department of Public Safety to provide security services and to reduce existing contracted security expenses in all of the business and industry agencies. The fifth budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for is the DPS Justice Grant, as shown on page 55. And the DPS Office of Criminal Justice Assistance is responsible for obtaining, administering, and subgranting federal grant funds from the U.S. Department of Justice to state and local government agencies. As shown on page 55, there are 6 other closing items, all of which appear reasonable to fiscal staff. Moving on to page 57, the 6th budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for is the DPS Justice Assistance Act budget account, which serves as a pass-through account for federal grants other than the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant received from the U.S. Department of Justice. As shown on page 57, there are 2 other closing items. Other closing item 2 is the governor's recommending the addition of federal grant funding in both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27 to provide services and resources to first-time probationers. The agency indicates this was a one-time grant fund that will not continue, and funding should be removed from the Justice Assistance Act budget account. As a result, fiscal staff recommends not approving Decision Unit E275. I'm on page 59. The 7th budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the Justice Assistance Grant Trust budget account, which is a pass-through for Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Byrne JAG funds received from the U.S. Department of Justice, and these grant funds are distributed to state and local government agencies that contribute to the effort of reducing or preventing crime, violence, and drug abuse. There were no other closing items identified in this budget account. The 8th budget account, as shown on page 61, and this is the account for reentry programs, which is the designated agency within the Office of Criminal Justice Assistance and accepts donations, gifts, bequests, grants, and other sources of funds to pay for service programs for the reentry of persons into the community. There are no other closing items identified for this budget account. And then the 9th and final budget account for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations is the State Board of Parole Commissioners, the Parole Board, The parole board is responsible for evaluating eligible offenders for parole to consider whether the release of the offender is compatible with the health, safety, and welfare of society. There are 6 other closing items, as shown on page 63, all of which appear reasonable to fiscal staff. So I'll now move on to the summary on page 65. As previously noted, fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for the following budget accounts. And to assist with the closing, fiscal staff has identified the budget accounts that are recommended to be closed as recommended by the governor, along with identified technical adjustments that are recommended below. Fiscal staff recommends the following budget accounts be closed as recommended by the governor, with the technical adjustments noted, and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. So budget account 4710, DPS Child Volunteer Background Checks Trust Account. Budget account 4729, DPS State Emergency Response Commission, with other closing item 5, including noted technical adjustments to align the transfer amounts between the State Emergency Response Commission budget account 4729, and the State Fire Marshal budget account 3816. The next budget account is budget account 3819. It's budget account 3819, DPS Cigarette Fire Safety Standard and Firefighter Support. The next budget account is budget account 4727 for Capitol Police, with the noted technical adjustment in other closing item 6 to align the transfer amounts between the Capitol Police budget account 4727, and the Department of Transportation budget account 4660, to support the Nevada Shared Radio System. Other closing item 7, consistent with the action on major closing issue 4 in the DPS Director's Office budget account, which is budget account 4706, and other closing item 8, consistent with the action taken on major closing issue 4 in the Business and Industry Administration budget account, which is budget account 4681. Budget account 4736, the DPS Justice Grant. Budget account 4708, DPS Justice Assistance Act, including not recommending approval of Decision Unit E275 for additional grant revenue as reflected in other closing item 2. Budget account 4734, DPS Justice Assistance Grant Trust Account. Budget account 4737, DPS Account for Reentry Programs, and budget account 3800, the Parole Board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Members, any questions on any of these budgets? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations as read by staff, along with providing the authority for them to make the technical adjustments that were listed.
We've got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. That concludes our budget closing recommendations for the day. That brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment here in Carson City or in Las Vegas, please come forward. Seeing nobody coming forward at this time, AVH, would anyone like to provide public comment by phone?
Thank you, Chair. The public lines are open and working, but we don't have any callers to provide comment at this time.
All right, that concludes our business, and I believe that concludes the business for this subcommittee. So thank you first and foremost to all of our staff who have helped us navigate these budgets and try and come up with solutions that are in the best interest of this state. We appreciate everything that you do. Thank you to all the members. Thank you to all the agencies for your hard work as well. We know it is a challenge to navigate all of this, and we appreciate all of the efforts that you've brought forward to help us try and navigate the budget situation that we find ourselves in. So with that, thank you. We are adjourned.